Welcome back to Nightfall Horrors. If you're new here, we're thrilled to have you join us. Before we begin, we'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment below and let us know. We love hearing from our audience. Now, sit back, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for a story that will chill you to the bone. Tonight, we dive into a tale of love, loss, and a terrifying, unexplainable presence that refuses to let go. Imagine, for a moment, that you've lost someone you love more than anything. Someone whose presence filled your world with warmth, laughter, and joy. That's what happened to one man, whose name we'll keep private, but whose story is far too eerie to forget. It was August 7th, 2012, when his girlfriend, Emily, tragically died in a car accident. She had been driving home from work when a reckless driver ran a red light, slamming into a car and taking her life in an instant. Gone in the blink of an eye. She was vibrant, full of life, a daring soul who would choose dare every single time, always ready for an adventure. She was the type of person who loved camping, yet could just as easily spend hours tinkering with gadgets, always fascinated by technology. Her scent, cinnamon, lingered in his memories long after she was gone. But as perfect as she seemed, Emily was human. She had her quirks. She used to say, "If I cark it first, don't just say good things about me." I've never liked that. If you don't pay me out, you're doing me a disservice. I've got so many flaws, and that's just part of me. He'd laugh about it at the time, but now those words haunted him. Emily wasn't the affectionate type. A side hug was as close as she'd get to a warm embrace. And those long toes of hers, she used to joke they were like a chimpanzee's. It might seem trivial now, but in the grief of her absence, every little detail felt like a piece of her he could hold on to. After her death, he left her Facebook account active. Why? Because to him, it felt too final to memorialize it, too permanent. He wasn't ready to let go. He would post messages on her wall, scroll through her pictures, even share some of her favorite songs. And in those small actions, he still felt close to her. But what happened next was far from what he expected. On September 4th, 2013, nearly a year after Emily's death, something strange happened. He received a message from a Facebook account. At first, it was just a simple message, a little hello, but he didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it was a friend of hers messing around. But as time went on, the messages kept coming. By November 16, 2013, things took a darker turn. Emily's mother, Susan, confirmed she hadn't logged into her daughter's account since the funeral. So if it wasn't Susan, who was it? Was it some tech-savvy friend of Emily's pulling an awful prank? The idea of someone mocking his grief twisted his stomach. But it wasn't just the messages that started to unsettle him. It was the photos. Emily's account began tagging herself in his pictures. Not just any pictures. Photos she had no business being in. The first time it happened, he was stunned. He thought it was some strange bug in the system, but it kept happening, over and over, and each time the tags were removed almost immediately. He felt like he was being haunted by her presence, a presence he couldn't explain. In February 2014, the tags became more frequent. Emily tagged herself in places she used to visit, spots that were so familiar to both of them. His house, the park, their favorite coffee shop. The worst part, she tagged herself in pictures that had been taken after her death. How was this even possible? But that wasn't the worst of it. As he went through the notifications, he began to notice something else. The messages weren't just coming from random people. No, these messages were copies of their old conversations. The exact words they'd exchanged when she was alive. It was as though someone was pulling memories from their chats and using them to respond to him. He tried to block it out, but the emotional toll was too much. The grief turned to anger, then desperation. He stopped sleeping. He was angry, so angry that he couldn't find peace. Then, in March 2014, something unimaginable happened. He sent a message, half in hope, half in despair, to what he thought was some cruel person using Emily's account. And to his shock, he received an answer. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a friend messing with him. It was something else. The message was so eerily familiar, recycled words, phrases from their past chats, that he couldn't deny it anymore. Something was wrong, something he couldn't explain. Days turned to weeks, and by April 16th, the messages had become even stranger, more nonsensical. He could feel his sanity slipping. Was it really her, or was it someone or something pretending to be her? The messages seemed to carry fragments of her old self, but they twisted into something darker. But the worst came in May 2014, the message that finally broke him. Freezing. What did that mean? He couldn't shake it off. The phrase haunted his dreams, twisting into nightmares where he saw Emily, frozen, in an ice-cold car, her body blue and lifeless. He was screaming at her to open the door, but she didn't hear him. She couldn't. As the months passed, the messages continued, getting more and more disturbing. Emily had never been one to express her emotions openly. She was awkward with affection. But when she had died, he'd realized how much he missed the small things. Her voice, her presence, even the little jokes they used to share. He had hoped memorializing her Facebook account would bring peace, but it didn't. Instead, it seemed to invite more chaos. The strange tagging, the cryptic messages, the feeling that Emily was still trying to reach him. Finally, he made the decision. On July 1st, 2014, he memorialized Emily's page. The messages stopped, but his heart still ached with the uncertainty. Was it really her? Or was something more sinister at work? Something that refused to let her rest? He couldn't escape the feeling that Emily wasn't really gone, that something was still reaching out from the other side. And now, he's left to wonder, what do you do when the dead refuse to stay buried? When their digital footprints won't fade? When the line between love and the supernatural blurs into something terrifying? What would you do in his place? Would you sever all ties with the past and finally let go? Or would you keep searching for answers, even if it meant facing the unknown? I hope you enjoyed the first story, whether it sent chills down your spine or had you looking over your shoulder. Now, let's dive into the second story. A husband and wife who had met on Facebook years ago were living what seemed like a perfect life. They had been married for over a decade with a beautiful 11-year-old daughter and had recently moved into their dream home in a peaceful rural area. The house was everything they had ever hoped for, spacious, quiet, and nestled in nature. But little did they know, it would soon become the setting for something terrifying. At first, it was subtle, just small, unsettling things that seemed almost insignificant. Shadows that moved in the corner of her eye, especially near the walk-in closet in their bedroom. She thought it was just the unfamiliarity of their new home, maybe the way light shifted when a car passed by outside. But as the days passed, the occurrences became harder to ignore. She would leave the bedroom, close the closet door, and return to find it wide open. Always. It was as if someone had deliberately left the door ajar. She tried to dismiss it as forgetfulness, her mind playing tricks on her. But when she tested it, closed the door tightly, and left the room with her husband, they came back to find it partially open again. He laughed it off, joking about their house possibly being on an Indian burial ground. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, one night, the situation escalated. She awoke to an odd sensation. At first, she thought it was just her husband rolling over in bed, but then she realized the bed was shifting in a rhythmic way, almost as if someone else was in it with them. She glanced over at her husband, who was fast asleep beside her, his breathing steady and deep. But the movements beneath the sheets continued, and they were coming from his waist. Her heart raced. She tried to convince herself it was just a bad dream, something her mind had conjured up in her sleep. She reached over, gently shaking him awake. But before he could respond, she noticed something chilling. His boxers were pulled down, and the movements she saw beneath the sheets were too precise, too unnatural to be a mere dream. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't understand. It was as if someone or something was manipulating him, touching him in ways that were beyond her comprehension. She shook him harder, desperate for him to wake, and when he finally opened his eyes, confused, everything stopped. The bed stilled, the sheets lay perfectly in place. He had no idea what had just happened, but the wife was terrified. She didn't know whether she was losing her mind or if something supernatural was at play. Her emotions were a whirlwind, betrayed, confused, and deeply frightened. The next morning, she entered the bedroom to confront him, her mind racing. What she found made her stomach churn. Their bed was a mess. His clothes, boxers and t-shirt, were thrown haphazardly on the floor. The bed itself looked as though it had been through an intimate encounter. The scent of him lingered in the air, a scent that told her something had happened while she was asleep. A wave of jealousy and confusion washed over her. Her mind couldn't make sense of it. When her husband woke up, he looked embarrassed, guilty even. He explained that after she had left the room, strange sensations started to take over him. Electric pin pricks, tiny shocks that began at his legs and worked their way up. By the time it reached his hips, the sensations intensified, so powerful that they overwhelmed him. He confessed that, despite being terrified, he couldn't resist. It went on for a long time until he was too exhausted to fight it anymore and passed out. The wife, struggling to process everything, was furious. She stormed off to the couch, angry at the situation, but even more terrified of the unknown. But it wasn't over. That night, the disturbing events happened again. At 2 a.m., she woke to find the bed moving again. This time, she could hear her husband moaning in his sleep, responding to whatever force was at work. She looked at him, her heart hammering in her chest, as she saw it happening once again. His boxers pulled down, and the sheets shifting in ways that defied all explanation. The terror gripped her. She held him tightly, shouting at the unseen force to leave them alone. Her husband woke with a gasp, shock and horror in his eyes. He confessed that despite his fear, he had climaxed during this bizarre experience. He was confused, embarrassed, and just as terrified as she was. When it stopped, they lay together in silence, shaken to their cores. The wife's jealousy and fear consumed her. She couldn't understand what was happening to her husband, what was taking control of him in such a strange and disturbing way. Every night, the haunting sensations continued. Her husband would be plagued by invisible seductive forces that drained him, leaving him exhausted and confused. Meanwhile, the wife felt herself losing her grip on reality, unsure whether to trust her own perceptions or what was truly happening to them. Desperate for answers, she turned to a website filled with similar stories. Couples who, like her, experienced inexplicable occurrences. It sounded insane, but she couldn't deny what she was feeling. Something was taking her husband from her, something she couldn't see, but could feel with every movement in their bed. She didn't know what to do anymore. Trapped in a nightmare, she felt her marriage beginning to unravel, and the fear that whatever was haunting them might be slowly pulling her husband away from her, a force she couldn't control or even comprehend. She had no answers, only questions. Was this real? Was it a dark force at work? Or was it all in her mind? And most of all, how could she stop it before it destroyed everything they had built together? Now, let's move to the last story. This one is particularly terrifying. An experience that made Odessa question everything she ever believed about online relationships and the dangers that lurk in the digital world. It all started about a year ago when Odessa met Robin and Dan on Facebook. They seemed like a lovely couple, and it didn't take long before they hit it off, bonding over shared interests and hobbies. Their online conversations were effortless, genuine, and Odessa felt like she had found real friends, despite only knowing them through social media. Everything was going great, until Robin introduced Odessa to Cody. Cody was a new addition to their circle. He had fallen on hard times and was living with Robin and Dan. Cody and Odessa started talking online, and over time they became closer. Cody opened up about his rough past, but he seemed friendly, even kind-hearted. Odessa was intrigued by him, especially when he shared his stories about supernatural experiences he had endured. But there was something different about Cody. He spoke about a spirit that had been attached to him for years. He said he could sense its presence at all times. At first, Odessa thought it was just a strange quirk, a story he told himself to feel special. But the more they spoke, the more it started to feel real. The spirit, Cody said, communicated with him in his sleep. Over the weeks, Cody and Odessa grew closer, talking late into the night. Their conversations became deeply personal, sharing life thoughts, ghost stories, hauntings, supernatural theories. They felt a bond that went beyond just friendship. But the deeper Odessa got, the more something felt off. The invitation to meet came after months of talking. Robin invited Odessa to stay for the weekend. Odessa, feeling comfortable with Cody after all their chats, agreed. But when she arrived at Robin's apartment, an unsettling feeling crept over her. Something was wrong. Cody greeted her with a forced smile. Robin and Dan seemed normal enough, but Odessa couldn't shake the unease. The tension in the air was palpable. That night, Odessa was asked to sleep in the same room as Cody. He had a mattress on the floor, and Odessa took the futon next to it, separated by a table. Robin and Dan were in the other room, leaving Odessa alone with Cody. And the silence. It was on the second night that things took a terrifying turn. Odessa woke up to what she can only describe as sleep whispering. It wasn't human. It was guttural, strange, and unsettling. At first, Odessa thought she was hearing things, but the sound came again. It sounded like Cody was mumbling in a language she didn't recognize, whispering gibberish under his breath. Confused and slightly uneasy, Odessa brushed it off at first. Maybe he was just talking in his sleep. But the noises didn't stop. They grew louder, more intense, more frightening. The next morning, Odessa mentioned it to Cody. He just looked at her, slightly confused, and shrugged it off. "I guess I talk a lot in my sleep," he said casually. But something about his eyes, the way he said it didn't sit right. It wasn't just sleep talking. It was something else. The next night, everything changed. Odessa's friend Kat was visiting, and they stayed up late, talking. Cody was again asleep on his mattress. Odessa and Kat joked about Cody's strange behavior, his sleep whispering. They dared each other to speak to him, to see if he'd react while he slept. So, Odessa said, "What if he's a demon?" "Kat, ask him if he's a demon." The room went ice cold. Odessa could feel it. The temperature dropped dramatically. An unnatural chill filled the room, and a heaviness settled in the air. Suddenly, Cody's body jerked upright. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he began to gag, snarl, like something else had taken over him. Frozen in fear, Odessa and Kat ran into the bathroom and locked themselves in. From inside the bathroom, they could hear Cody's voice. Only, it wasn't his. It was deep, guttural, unrecognizable. He spoke in a language that sent chills down Odessa's spine. The words didn't make sense, but one sentence stood out. "They are still in there." This wasn't Cody anymore. Whatever had been living inside him for so long had taken full control. As time passed, the fear grew. Odessa and Kat could hear Cody pleading for them to open the door, but his voice, it wasn't right. Mixed with growls, snarls, and gibberish, it sounded like something else, something dark. They stayed locked in that bathroom for what felt like hours, unable to understand what was happening. Finally, Odessa gathered enough courage to open the door. What she saw froze her blood. Cody was sitting there, grinning with an evil smile, his eyes glowing in the dim light. Odessa slammed the door shut again, but the fear was undeniable now. She begged for it to end, but it wasn't over. Cody's voice changed again. "Open the door." The tension in the apartment was unbearable. At one point, the bathroom door started vibrating violently, as if something was trying to break through. Panicking, Odessa banged on the door, hoping someone would hear her. The second she did, the cold, dark presence lifted. Cody's voice went quiet. Hesitant, Odessa and Kat opened the door, not knowing what to expect. But when they stepped out, Cody was acting like nothing had happened. He was back on the mattress, calm, normal. He didn't remember any of it. His throat was dry, and he didn't understand why he'd been acting so strange. But the truth came out. Cody admitted there was a spirit attached to him. He called it John. This entity had been with him for years, ever since childhood. His mother knew about it. His ex-girlfriend knew. She was terrified of sleeping next to him because she had heard him talking to John in his sleep. But what Odessa witnessed that night was no spirit. It was a demon. The entity had used their online connection as a gateway to possess Cody And now it was in complete control. Odessa confronted Cody, but he didn't take kindly to her words. It was clear the demon didn't want anyone questioning its power. Things escalated, and soon they made the decision. Cody had to leave. He couldn't stay there any longer. He needed help, but only if he was willing to acknowledge the darkness inside him. Eventually, Cody was sent back to live with his family, but the damage was already done. Odessa severed all contact with Cody. She couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. Kat, on the other hand, continued to stay in touch with Cody. Until one night, he broke into her apartment. Terrified, Kat called the police. Now, she's in the process of getting a restraining order against him. That night stays with Odessa. Every detail, every chill, every haunting memory. The online connection that began so innocently on Facebook spiraled into something so much darker than she could have imagined. So let this be a warning. Don't ignore the signs. The person you're talking to online might not be who they say they are. What started as a harmless friendship turned into a nightmare. And Odessa is just lucky to have escaped with her life. And that's where this terrifying stories ends. Remember, online connections can hide dark secrets. Stay cautious and safe. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay safe.